The road was silent that evening, only the sound of dry wind moving across the empty land. David walked home slowly, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He carried a sack of tools on his shoulder, tired from a long day of work. The sun was almost gone, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He was thinking only about food and rest when something strange caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just a pile of old cloth lying on the side of the road. But as he came closer, his heart skipped a beat. It was not cloth, it was not trash, it was a small body curled into the dirt, almost lifeless. For a moment, David froze, not sure if it was human or something else. He bent down carefully, his hands shaking a little. The figure was a girl, thin and weak, her skin covered in dust, but her skin was not like his. It had a faint glow under the dirt, soft patterns that seemed to shine and fade like light hidden under water. Her hair was tangled, silver strands mixed with mud. Her lips were dry and cracked, and her breathing was so faint it was almost lost in the silence. David looked around. There was no one on the road, no wagon, no traveler, no family looking for a lost child. It was only her, abandoned, left in the dirt like she had no value. He felt anger rise inside him, mixed with a strong pull of pity. Someone had left her here to die and no one cared. Slowly, he touched her shoulder. "Hey," he whispered, not even sure if she could understand. Her eyes opened just a little, and in that moment, David's breath caught. They were not human. Eyes, they glowed faintly with a strange blue light, deep and full of fear. She looked at him, but she did not speak. Her body trembled like a hunted animal, unsure if this man was danger or safety. David took a step back, thinking fast. If she was alien, then this was not normal. People in the towns whispered about strange things. Cargo, ships passing, smugglers trading, and creatures used as gifts for the rich. He never believed much of it. But now one of those stories was lying here in front of him, half dead, abandoned in the dirt. He could walk away, pretend he never saw her. It would be easy, safe, and no trouble for him. But something in her eyes stopped him. It was not just fear. It was a silent cry for help. She was too weak to move, too broken to even run, and he could not leave her like that. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her. She flinched, but when she felt the warmth, she closed her eyes again. He lifted her gently, surprised by how light she was. She was hardly heavier than his sack of tools, as if hunger and pain had stolen all her strength. The road home felt longer, now every step heavy with questions. What if someone came looking for her? What if she was dangerous? What if keeping her would bring trouble to him? But when he looked down at her face resting against his chest, he knew he could not let her go back into the dirt. Not tonight. Not ever, as he walked. The night grew darker. The stars appeared, one by one above him. Her faint glow was visible even under the coat, a soft light pulsing like a heartbeat. He thought about how strange this was, how his life had been simple before this moment, and now with each step he was stepping into something unknown, something bigger than himself. When he finally reached his small wooden house, he pushed the door open with his foot and laid her carefully on the old bed. The room was dim, the smell of firewood and bread hanging in the air. For a second, he just stood there, watching her breathe. She looked fragile, like glass that could break at any touch. Yet there was also something unexplainable about her, like she did not belong to this world. And still, she was here, under his roof, because he chose not to walk away. He brought a bowl of water and wet a cloth, gently cleaning the dirt from her face. The silver of her hair shone faintly under the firelight. Her glowing patterns became clearer, lines across her skin almost like stars drawn on her body. He whispered softly, "You're safe now," though he was not sure she could hear or understand. Her eyes opened once more, just a flicker. She looked at him again, still afraid, still unsure, but not entirely alone anymore. In that quiet moment, David felt something shift inside him. It was not just pity anymore, not just kindness. It was a decision, a choice that would change everything. He did not know who she was, why she was abandoned, or what danger might come. But he knew one thing. He would not let her be left in the dirt again. Outside, the wind howled over the empty land. Inside, in a small wooden house, a human and an alien girl began a story neither of them had expected. And for the first time, the girl's breathing became steady. The dirt was no longer her only companion. She had found something different, a stranger who refused to walk away. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the small house, sending waves of warmth into the cold night. David sat on the wooden chair near the bed, his eyes fixed on the strange girl lying under his old blanket. She had not spoken a word, not even a sound, but she was alive. Her chest rose and fell with slow, weak breaths. That alone gave him relief, though it also filled his mind with questions. He leaned forward, dipping the cloth into the bowl of water again. Gently, he pressed it against her forehead, washing away more of the dirt that clung to her skin. Under the firelight, her face looked younger than he expected, maybe no older than 16 or 17. But it was not her age that struck him. It was her difference, her glowing skin, faint and dim but steady, like tiny stars under her flesh. No human carried such a light. She was not from here, not from his world. David had heard stories, of course. Merchants in the town whispered of ships coming down in secret places, of creatures taken, traded or sold, as if they were things. But he never believed it. And even if he had, he never thought one would end up here, in his home, under his care. Her eyes flickered open for a moment, startling him. The faint blue glow inside them returned, weak, but still full of that same silent fear. She tried to push herself up, but her body gave way and she fell back against the pillow. David raised his hand slowly, showing her the bread he had placed on the table. "It's all right," he said softly, his voice calm. "Careful. You're safe here, you need food." She didn't understand his words. He could see that. Her eyes narrowed with confusion. But her gaze fell to the bread, and her lips trembled, as if torn between fear and hunger. David broke the bread into small pieces and placed one near her hand. For a long moment she did not move. Then with trembling fingers she took the piece and brought it to her mouth. The way she ate, it was desperate, hurried, almost painful to watch, as if she had not tasted food in days, maybe weeks. He gave her water next. She coughed as she drank too quickly, but her body slowly relaxed as strength returned. The look in her eyes shifted, only a little. The fear was still there, but now mixed with something new. Caution, curiosity, maybe even hope. David sat back and let her eat in silence. He knew forcing words would do nothing. Trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. And right now, giving her food and warmth was enough. The night grew deeper. Outside, wolves howled in the distance. The wind pressed against the wooden walls like restless hands. Inside, the house felt like another world. Quiet, small, and holding a fragile secret. When she finished eating, she looked at him again. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came. Instead, she lowered her head, curling into the blanket. For the first time since he found her, her body seemed to rest. Not fully, not freely, but at least she closed her eyes without the tightness of fear. David stayed awake long after, his thoughts heavy. What was he doing? Why had he brought her here? If anyone found out, they could accuse him of hiding an alien, of breaking laws he never fully understood. People were punished for less. And yet, he could not bring himself to regret it. He remembered the dirt clinging to her skin, the way her breath had almost stopped. Leaving her there would have been no different than killing her with his own hands. He sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. His life had been simple before. Work in the fields, trade in the town, nights in silence. But now his home held a secret no one could know. A girl who had been treated like nothing, abandoned like trash. And somehow, fate had placed her in his path. The fire burned low. He rose, added more wood, and sat again. Her soft glow under the blanket gave the room an otherworldly light. He stared at it, both fearful and mesmerized. How could someone look so fragile and yet so unreal at the same time? As sleep finally began to pull at his eyes, he whispered to himself, "I don't know who you are, but you're safe here." The words were more for him than for her, a promise to hold on to, even though he knew this was only the beginning. Outside, the world was dark and dangerous, but inside that little house, something had changed. A human, stranger and an alien girl shared the same roof, the same warmth, the same silence, and without speaking, a bond had begun to form, small, fragile but alive. The girl, half asleep, opened her glowing eyes one last time. She watched him as he dozed in the chair, his head heavy with exhaustion, her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something softer, something closer to trust. And then finally, she let herself drift into real sleep. For the first time in a long time, she was not lying in the dirt. She was in a shelter with someone who did not turn away. The morning light slipped gently through the cracks in the wooden walls. Birds sang outside and the air smelled of wet soil after the night's wind. David woke in the chair, his neck stiff, his body heavy. For a moment, he forgot what had happened. Then his eyes moved to the bed and the memory returned. The strange girl with glowing skin now sleeping under his blanket. Her chest rose and fell more steadily than before. Her face, though still pale, was no longer as lifeless. The faint glow on her skin flickered in patterns like tiny waves of light moving across her arms. David leaned closer, trying to understand. It was beautiful, but also mysterious. Like looking at a map with no clear direction, he thought of the town. If anyone saw her, they would not call her a child. They would call her property. He had heard too many stories, merchants boasting in whispers about exotic gifts, creatures sold to rich houses chained like pets. His stomach twisted with anger. If she had been part of that trade, then her presence here was more dangerous than he had imagined. A faint sound broke his thoughts. Her eyes opened slowly, the soft blue glow returning. This time, she did not flinch at the sight of him. Instead, she studied his face, as if measuring whether he was safe. David offered a small piece of bread again. She hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. Her lips moved, as though she wanted to form words. But the sound that came was broken, unfamiliar, a language not his own, carried on a voice weak and fragile. David leaned forward, speaking slowly. "I don't understand, but it's okay." He placed a hand gently on his chest. "David," he said, then pointed at her with a questioning look. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then she pressed her hand against her chest, her lips shaping a word. It was soft, almost lost in the air, but he heard it. Lyra. The name lingered between them, fragile as glass. David repeated it quietly. Lyra. Her eyes widened slightly, as though she was surprised to hear her name spoken kindly. For the first time, the fear in her gaze softened, even if only a little. As the day passed, she tried again and again to speak. Her words came broken, scattered between her own tongue and strange, half-formed sounds in his. David listened carefully, piecing together what he could. Bit by bit, he began to understand her story. She spoke of darkness, of a cage filled with others like her, of hands that pulled her out and placed her into a box. Her small body was dressed in silk that wasn't hers, her wrists marked with iron rings. They told her she was a gift for someone powerful, someone who would own her. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her glowing eyes filling with a pain deeper than hunger. But then her story broke into fragments. The journey cut short, rough voices, a sudden stop, then dirt, cold and endless, where she had been thrown like trash. David's fists tightened on his knees, his jaw locked. As he listened, he had suspected cruelty, but hearing it from her lips made his blood burn. She was not a traveler, not a wanderer. She had been taken, used, discarded. A living being treated like an object. Not gift, she whispered suddenly, shaking her head with force. Her weak hands clenched the blanket as if tearing it apart. Her eyes locked onto his, desperate for him to understand. Not thing. David leaned closer, his voice steady. You're not a thing, Lyra. The words seemed to surprise her, as though no one had spoken them before. Her lips parted and her body shook with silent tears. Not loud, not wild, just quiet. Streams of pain she had carried too long. The room filled with heavy silence, only the sound of fire and her quiet sobs. David sat near her, not touching, not forcing. He simply stayed, letting her know she was not alone. Outside, the sun climbed higher, but inside the small wooden house, a different light grew. It was not just the glow of her skin, it was the fragile bond forming between them. Trust, fragile as a single thread, had begun to stretch between human and alien. David knew then that this was no accident. She was not in his path by chance. He could walk away, turn her in, let others decide her fate. But each word she whispered, each tear she shed carved itself into his heart. This was no gift, no mistake of delivery. This was a person, abandoned but alive. And now, she had spoken her past into the quiet shelter of his home, leaving him with a choice he could no longer escape. That night, as the fire burned low again, David repeated her name softly into the silence. Lyra. And for the first time she whispered his back. David. Her voice broken but true. It was not much, but it was enough to change everything. In the stillness of the night, two strangers bound by pain and kindness had taken their first real step toward something neither of them understood yet, something that felt like family. Days passed slowly in the little wooden house. Each sunrise brought a new test. Each night carried the same silent questions. Who was she really? Why had she been left to die? And what would happen if others discovered she was alive and with him? Yet in those quiet days, something else grew, something stronger than fear. David began to notice how the girl, Lyra, started changing bit by bit. Her strength returned little by little, her breathing steady, her movements less shaky, but more than that, her eyes no longer carried only fear. Sometimes when she looked at him, there was a flicker of trust, fragile but real. One morning, David placed a small loaf of bread on the table. The smell filled the house, warm and rich. He sat across from her, showing her how to break the bread into smaller pieces. She watched carefully, then copied his movements with her thin fingers. When she brought a piece to her mouth, her lips curved slightly. Not a full smile, but something close. A light that warmed the room more than the fire ever could. Good, David said softly, nodding at her. Lyra tilted her head, repeating the word slowly. Good. Her voice was soft, broken, but the sound of it made David's chest tighten. She was learning step by step. Each word she tried was like a bridge built between their worlds. That day, he showed her something new. Outside the house, he gathered sticks and dried leaves. He struck flint until sparks fell onto them. The fire rose, bright and hot. Lyra gasped softly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Her glowing skin reflected the flames, her eyes wide with fear. But David smiled gently, reaching his hand toward the fire. Warm, he said, holding his palm close to the heat. Then he pointed at her and back to the fire. Warm, safe. For a long moment she hesitated. Then slowly, trembling, she stretched her hand toward the flame. The heat touched her skin and she flinched, but she did not pull away. Instead, she looked at him again, her eyes filled with curiosity. Warm, she whispered, repeating the word with a shaky smile. It was the first real smile he had seen on her face. Not a trick of the firelight, not a mistake, a true fragile smile, like the beginning of spring after a long winter. David felt something stir in his chest, a feeling deeper than simple kindness, a quiet bond forming, something he could not ignore. As the days turned into nights, they shared more small lessons. David taught her words for water, bread, fire, home. She repeated each one carefully, sometimes laughing when her tongue stumbled. That laughter was soft, unsure, but it was laughter all the same. And each time she laughed, David felt the heavy shadows in his life lift just a little. But the bond was not only words, it was in the way she began to move around the house. How she would help him carry wood, though her arm still trembled with weakness. How she carefully folded the blanket each morning. How she watched him with quiet eyes, always learning, always listening. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the fire burned low, David caught her staring at the small carvings on the shelf, wooden shapes he had made long ago, birds, animals, simple things. She reached out, touching one with her slender fingers. Her glowing patterns lit up softly, like starlight brushing across the wooden figure. Then she looked at him, pointing, her eyes asking a silent question. David smiled, picking up the carving. "Bird," he said, moving his hand like wings in flight. She tilted her head, repeating, "Be-erd." Then she lifted her hand and traced a glowing line in the air. It formed a shape, clumsy but clear. A bird drawn in light. David stared in awe. He had never seen such a thing. Her gift was not just her glow. It was something more, something beyond human reach. That night when he lay in bed, he could not stop thinking of it. The way she had smiled, the way she had drawn light into the air. This girl was not meant to be caged, not meant to be treated like a gift. She carried wonders inside her, and yet she had been thrown into the dirt, abandoned like nothing. His fists clenched as he thought of it, anger burning inside. But then he looked at her, sleeping peacefully by the fire, her face calm, her body finally at rest. And he knew his anger could not change the past, but maybe, just maybe, it could protect her future. As he drifted into sleep, he realized something. This bond between them was no accident. It was not just kindness anymore. It was something stronger, something that would not break. For the first time, David whispered the word to himself. Family. And though she could not hear it, the word lingered in the air. Soft, fragile, but full of promise, a bond of kindness that was beginning to change everything. The nights around David's house were usually quiet, only the sound of crickets, the whisper of wind through dry grass, and sometimes the distant howl of wolves. But tonight felt different. The silence was heavier, broken by strange noises that made the hairs on his neck rise. David sat by the fire with Lyra, who was tracing faint glowing patterns on the table with her finger. She had learned to smile more these days, even to laugh softly when she mispronounced a word. But now her glow dimmed, her body stiffened. Her glowing eyes turned to the door as if she sensed something unseen. David followed her gaze. At first he heard nothing, then a crunch of footsteps on gravel, faint but clear in the quiet night. His stomach tightened. No traveler passed this road at night. No neighbor wandered this far into the empty land. Whoever was out there was not here by chance. He stood slowly, motioning for her to stay quiet. Her eyes widened, and she pulled the blanket around her shoulders. David grabbed the small hunting knife from the shelf. It was not much, but it was all he had. The footsteps grew closer, circling the house. The wooden walls creaked as shadows passed across the windows. Lyra's breathing quickened, her glow trembling like a candle in wind. David pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay silent. Then he moved to the window, peeking through the crack. Two figures stood in the moonlight, cloaked and whispering. Their voices were low, but he caught fragments. The crate went missing. Worth something still. Check inside. David's blood ran cold. They were looking for her. The crate she spoke of, the gift meant for someone else. These men were part of it. They had come to claim what they thought was theirs. He turned back to Lyra. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She shook her head rapidly, whispering in her broken voice, "No. No go. No take." Her words cut into him like knives. She had been thrown away once, and now they wanted to drag her back. The door rattled. One of the men tried the handle. The sound echoed through the small house like thunder. Lyra gasped and backed against the wall. David tightened his grip on the knife, his heart pounding. "Stay back," he whispered firmly to her, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. The men outside cursed, one of them kicking the wooden door, but the old wood held, though it groaned under the impact. The firelight flickered wildly, shadows dancing across the walls. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Minutes dragged like hours. The men circled the house again, their voices sharper now. "We'll come back at dawn," one hissed. "She can't vanish," the other replied. Their footsteps slowly faded into the night, swallowed by the wind. David stayed frozen near the door, his knife still in hand. He listened until the silence returned, heavy and thick. Only then did he lower the blade. His hands trembled. But not from fear, from anger. Raw and burning, when he turned back, he saw Lyra curled in the corner, shaking. Her glowing skin flickered weakly, dimmer than he had ever seen it. He dropped the knife on the table and moved toward her. She flinched, at first, but when he knelt and placed a hand gently on her shoulder, she looked up. Her eyes were wet, her lips trembling. "They come, take," she whispered, the words broken, desperate. David shook his head firmly, his voice steady. "No one's taking you, Lyra." He didn't know if she fully understood, but when she stared into his eyes, her breathing slowed just a little. She clutched his sleeve tightly, as if clinging to the only thing keeping her from being dragged back into the dark. He stayed with her by the fire until her trembling eased. Neither of them spoke much, but in that silence, a promise was made. He had not chosen this fight, but it had come to his door, and now he could not turn away. Later that night, when she finally fell asleep against his arm, David stared into the flames, his jaw tight. He thought of the men's voices, of their claim. To them, she was still a thing, a lost prize to recover, but to him she was no longer a stranger, no longer just an accident. She was someone who trusted him, someone who needed him, and he would fight to keep her safe. Outside, the night grew quiet again, but the shadows still lingered, waiting. David knew they would return. He knew trouble had only begun. Yet as he looked at Lyra sleeping, her faint glow steady once more, he whispered the words like a vow. "You're not theirs. You're mine to protect." The next morning came heavy with silence. The night's fear had not fully faded. The marks on the door showed where the strangers had kicked it, wood splintered, edges cracked, a warning left behind. David stared at it for a long time. His jaw tight, his hands clenched, Lyra sat at the table, the blanket around her shoulders. Her glow was faint, almost dull. She kept glancing at the broken door, as if it would open again at any moment. Her eyes no longer carried only fear. Now, they carried a question, a desperate one. Would he send her away to save himself? David knew she was waiting for his answer, and in truth he had thought of it. The men would return, maybe with more force. Keeping her meant danger, maybe even death. If he gave her up, he could go back to his quiet life, safe, alone, forgotten. But when he looked at her, fragile yet alive, he felt the weight of his own heart press against him. He remembered the night he found her in the dirt, her broken voice whispering nothing, the way her hands had drawn light in the air, the way she had smiled at the word warm. He could not erase those things. He could not erase her. David pulled out the chair and sat across from her. His voice was firm but gentle. "Lyra," he said, pointing to himself. "David." Then he pointed to her. "Lyra." Her eyes followed his hands, confused. Then he placed his palm flat on the table between them. He pointed to her, then back to himself. "Family," he said slowly, clearly. For a long moment, she did not move. Her lips parted, her glowing eyes wide. She stared at him as if she had not heard the word in years, or perhaps had never heard it meant for her. "Illy," she whispered, stumbling over the sound. Her hand lifted, trembling, and she placed it on the table beside his. "Family?" she asked again, her voice weak but filled with hope. David nodded, his voice steady. Yes, family. His chest tightened as he spoke it. He had never said the word with such weight. He had no wife, no children, no parents left. But now, across the table from him, sat someone who needed that word as much as he did. Lyra's glowing eyes filled with tears. Not the tears of fear he had seen before, but tears of something new, something fragile. Belonging, her lips curved into a smile broken by sobs. Her voice cracked as she repeated, "Family. David." Lyra. Her hand pressed against her chest, then to his arm. It was not perfect language, but it was enough. It was a promise spoken without needing full words. For the first time, David felt the weight of choice lift from him. There was no more question. He would not give her up no matter the cost. She was not a burden, not a mistake. She was his family. The day passed quietly. David worked outside, chopping wood, his eyes always scanning the horizon. He knew the men would return, but each strike of the axe was sharper, stronger. Not just for his survival now, but for hers too. Inside, Lyra cleaned the table, folded the blankets. Her glow was brighter than it had been in days. She hummed softly, a tune in her own language, strange and haunting but full of life. When David returned, sweat on his brow, she looked at him with something he had never seen before. Trust, clear and strong. That night, as the fire warmed the small house, Lyra sat beside him closer than ever. She tried again to say his name. "Da-vid," she whispered, smiling through the effort. Then she pointed to herself. "Lyra." And softly, carefully, she repeated the word that now bound them together. Family. David placed his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Her glow wrapped around him like starlight. For the first time in years, his home no longer felt empty, no longer silent. It was filled with something he thought he had lost long ago. Love, not the romantic kind, but the deeper kind, the kind that chooses, protects, and never lets go. But even as peace filled the room, the shadows outside grew longer. The men would return, and soon they would not accept his choice so easily. But David had made his vow. No matter what came, she was no longer alone in the dirt. She was his family now, and he would fight the world to keep it that way.